back to, the film itself. The shoot goes on, and I'm around it a lot. There's one friend of mine, the GM at Balaban's right next door, his condo. They're shooting something, and I run into Tommy quite a bit. Tommy Gross is the second AD on the film, and there is something of a tragedy that happens. As a sign of the times. It's kind of like that scene in A Single Man, when Colin Firth gets that call that his lover, his partner, has been killed in a car accident. That happens to Tommy while he's at the tail end of the shoot. It's going right till about Christmas, and I think breaks around Christmas. So they start maybe it's like 2.5 months shoot. His partner gets in a serious car accident, is in a coma for a while, eventually dies, and Tommy is not allowed to see his partner, in the hospital, and it's just killing him. You can just tell, eventually he dies. Tommy's not really allowed to go to the funeral. That kind of whole kind of family denying, their son's sexuality or whatever. And then not long after, a few months later, Tommy Gross himself dies in a car accident. There's a fund for him. There's a fund in his name, that's at Webster University. And, it is kind of a tragic story. Many of the crew, like I mentioned, Jordan, Alexander Stone, go back for his funeral. They became very tight with him over the course of, you're working together for several months, it is a tight unit, and it is a sad story. And then, Mark Rosenberg goes on to produce Presumed Innocent, comes out the same year as White Palace, and then another film, House of the Spirits, I think, and then Flesh and Bone, that's Clovis's follow-up to Fabulous Baker Boys. He dies on the set of that. I think he has a heart attack, but I think he was choking on something, and then that spurred on the heart attack, and that's, obviously tragic story, and in many ways kind of emblematic of what happens to these films eventually, and when I do finally get into the Writers Guild and kind of start my own career in 07, 08, I just got in 06. The 07, 08 strike happens, and that strike is really about how physical media is going away. And it's, again, this is many years earlier, White Palace and Rosenberg and all that stuff, but they're all pointing in a direction where this business is going to change radically to the point of where it's not going to be what we thought it was. It ends up kind of, those films go away, these mid-level films that are the lifeblood of the business. It just becomes about tent poles and little indies. Even Oscar caliber films have to be made for a very, very minute budget unless one of the streamers really gets behind it. But the budgets are really small. It's very limited. And it's just a time that just comes and goes. And, people think that these things will just last forever. But, you ask them. You think about the great writers in the 20th century. Unfortunately, well, there's many. But, you think of Hemingway or Fitzgerald, even John Updike, Gertrude Stein, all these writers. How did they make a living before they sold their first novel? Well, some maybe were journalists or whatever. But in many cases, they sold their short stories to magazines. Try that today. It doesn't exist. It's gone. And I'm not saying feature films are going to go away, right? But close. They're already migrating into something completely different. The theatrical experience is not what it was. Changing radically. Is going to become probably something like like a micro cinema kind of thing. Smaller films, smaller, shorter theatrical runs, so on and so forth, and it's just, that's just the reality that we face, and I used to get a lot of resistance that that this thing is heading in a not so great direction. I don't get that resistance anymore. It's a tough time out there, and that's why I just wanted to shine a light on some of these films. and a producer again like Rosenberg, who really represented something. And again, we're not talking Tarkovsky or Ozu or something, these art house type things. We're talking good quality, mid-level, adult themed, romantic in some cases, whatever the case may be. Quality pictures made on a reasonable budget, with real, in some cases, A-list talent, B-plus level talent, right? That you just don't see that often anymore. And I just thought that, it was noteworthy to kind of shine a light on some of these pictures and on Mark's career as well, and some of the things he did working with Sidney Pollack or working with his wife, Paula Weinstein. And, unfortunately, White Palace was, for me personally, not working on it, but being around it the whole time, it was just, it was a tough, bitter pill to swallow. Sometimes these opportunities come at a point when you're not prepared, and that's how life works sometimes. I mean, I ended up being a filmmaker. I ended up making my own film a few years later. Shot a lot of it in St. Louis, actually. I'd end up in Chicago for a while and come back to St. Louis and eventually would, get my life in order and really pursue this seriously. But, you can't. I mean, it's certainly a lesson, but hopefully younger people will take it. When an opportunity knocks, man, you got to be ready. You got to be ready, And so, maybe somebody will get something out of that. I don't know. But certainly worth checking the film out and checking these films out that we were talking about, in particular Fabulous Baker Boys, White Palace, Flesh and Bone, Presumed Innocent, a Alan Pakula film. These were all really fascinating pictures that, again, kind of a sign of the times, a thing of the past. And I was just grateful to just, get to meet some of these people and just get at least a feel for it. Anyway, that's it, guys. Thanks.